Parliament cannot legislate at a pace that keeps up with the evolutions of this technology.
So, Charlotte, I wonder if it makes sense to begin by actually explaining to people who've lived a sheltered life what deepfake pornography actually is.
Okay, so deepfake images or videos are images or videos which look real, but they're not actually real content. So you can take, using AI technology now, any woman's photograph and run it through an app or an online platform and create a sexually explicit image or video of a woman without her consent.
And it looks just like her.
It looks just like her.
And so even though it isn't her actual image, she suffers the harm reputationally, to her emotional health and so on.
That's right. And also women now are living under this ever-present threat that their choice has been taken away from them. They no longer get to choose who owns sexually explicit content of them. This is all about a woman having the freedom to choose who owns intimate images of her, returning that power back to where it belongs.
But it's quite a brave thing, if I may say so, to take this on, isn't it? Because you're taking on the broligarchy, the tech gazillionaires on the one hand, and the manosphere on the other, with quite a radical feminist protection campaign that some people will say smacks of censorship and all the rest of it. That's quite a brave thing to take on.
Thank you. We're very lucky in that the support in the Lords has been overwhelming for it. And I have a fantastic group of campaigners, survivors, charities that I work with to build comprehensive law around intimate image abuse, because it's far more complex and multifaceted than just the simple criminalising the creation.
So can we go back a bit and get into how you first discovered the problem and how you educated yourself and who advised you and who supported you, and a little more detail about how you built this campaign?
So if you remember a few years back, the government criminalised the non-consensual sharing of sexually explicit images, both real and deepfake. But they didn't criminalise the non-consensual creation of them, which meant that anyone could sit at home and create an image of a woman without her consent. So there was this gaping hole in our legislation that so many survivors and campaigners were pushing for. And if you remember, I first raised this back in February 2024, I think it was. And you were a brilliant help right from the beginning, Shami. I was so alarmed by the fact that there'd been a Law Commission report in July 22, which said they were less sure whether the creation of these, what they called the simple creation of these images, was serious enough to criminalise, which to me was totally shocking, because they were basically saying if a woman doesn't know, there's not really any harm caused.
So just to put some facts and figures around this, the most popular website dedicated to sexualised deepfakes, which we won't name, in January 2023, 14 million hits every month. And Ofcom they did their own work around this and have said that 1 in 7 people in the UK say they've seen sexual deepfakes, but less than 1 in 10 feel confident that they could spot a deepfake should they come across it.
I think what's hugely concerning as well is Internet Matters recently surveyed some young children, and they were more concerned, they were more worried by the sharing of a deepfake than a real image. And I think that really speaks to the lack of control people feel over this content.
Of course, yeah.
That's very, very worrying. So that's children.
That's children.
Children are more acutely aware of some of this technology than their parents and their grandparents.
Exactly.
Well, there you go. More reason to have younger legislators, you might think.
You're totally right. And actually some brilliant news of recent is that the largest of the sites has shut up shop.
And how did that happen?
It's no longer a viable business model.
Incredible.
Because as we know, the interest of these companies is in making money. This is why they're doing it. And the fact that they're abusing women, does not matter. It's about the clicks they get, the people flooding to these sites. And suddenly a notice went up yesterday saying we no longer have the data supply. We're shutting up shop.
So they're concerned about that they won't be able to do this with impunity anymore, and there'll be legal sanctions and potentially business downsides to making money this way. That's really important, isn't it?
It's huge. But the thing we found, which is so distressing, is that this kind of abuse is like water. It always finds the cracks.
Yeah.
And so whilst we've seen this large site has shut down, the harm is now moving. So one of the issues we've spoken about in the past, Shami, is this awful problem of semen images. And that is on the rise. And the problem with this is that it just falls into the outskirts of the law, because if a woman is clothed, if there's no genitalia in the image, then her only recourse is a harassment offence. And for harassment, you will know, Shami, it has to be a repeated course of action.
So there's always another creative way to abuse women and make a profit out of it. Can I go back to this neat little demarcation that people were making, that even the Law Commission was making, between creation and sharing? The suggestion being that the harm is only done when you share the image. Can we try and unpick why that thinking is wrong?
It's absolutely horrific. This idea that if a woman doesn't know, then there's no harm caused. And there was even this unbelievable quote in there where someone equated it to sexual fantasy.
Right.
Wow.
Which is unbelievable. Your sexual fantasy, it can't be hacked. But even the knowledge that a woman walking along the street knows that anyone can take a photograph of her and turn that into sexual content.
Well, that's the thing. You don't need to share anymore if millions and millions of people can create the content for themselves.
Yeah.
Who needs to share?
Exactly.
If everyone can generate.
Yeah.
And the brilliant Professor Claire McGlynn-Casey from Durham University equated it to voyeurism. It's, the new voyeurism.
Well, of course. So if somebody plants a hidden camera in your shower and you never know it's there, and the person consumes the images themselves, your next door neighbour, your flatmate, they never share them with anyone else. They just consume them. You never know. They're never shared. Do we think that is harmful or not?
Exactly. And this is what your book highlighted so well, that our laws for the internet are not catching up with quote unquote real life. And they're not keeping pace as these harms evolve.
Well, thank you for mentioning the book, but I was wondering what we can learn about from deepfake porn and from your campaign in terms of the policing of the internet more generally, because I think some basic problems in the business model are making people very, very vulnerable more generally. Not just women and girls in relation to deepfake porn, but elections could be stolen on the basis of deepfake images that aren't necessarily porn, but make a democratic politician look like they're saying or doing something that they never did.
Exactly.
You can send people down an algorithm that encourages them to self-harm,
Exactly.
commit suicide. get involved in gambling, if they have a proclivity to that, you're sending people down rabbit holes of more and more harmful content.
Well, the World Economic Forum, in their most recent risk report, said that misinformation and disinformation is the greatest short-term threat to democracy and world stability for the next short term. I think for them is something like 3 to 5 years. So disinformation, which of course generative AI and deepfake is all part of.
Exactly. These algorithms are driving hate, they're driving division, and they push people into rabbit holes of their own ways of thinking.
So look, I'm going to say this, aren't I, in a speakeasy, which is a little bit surreptitious, a little bit underground, but you're a conservative, I'm to the left of you. Some people would say it's not very conservative to be anti-capitalist, anti-big tech, to be seeking more regulation, is it? What would you say to perhaps a conservative colleague who took that view?
This is about freedom and a woman's freedom to choose. Every woman should have the freedom to choose who owns sexually explicit content of them. But I would also say I've not had a single conservative colleague say that to me. The cross-party support has been overwhelming. I think it was all of us against the government.
People just not getting the harm, I think.
Exactly. And trying to persuade the government to move on this, because if you remember, one of the huge issues that we had was whether this law should be consent-based. And that was so important to all of us, because a woman's consent should always be enough. If a woman does not consent to this content being created of her, it shouldn't happen. So if you remember, if we rewind back, the government introduced their own amendment in to rival mine, which was not consent-based. It was it meant women would have to prove intent to cause harm, distress, humiliation, or gain sexual gratification.
And he says, I was just having fun.
Exactly.
It was just humour.
Exactly.
And I know we're talking lots about women, but just there probably will be listeners who'll be thinking this must happen to men as well. But I assume that it must be weighted towards mostly women who are victims.
So we tend to focus the conversation on women because of all deepfakes. 98% are pornographic, and of those, 99% are of women. And there's a simple reason for this, and it's something Shami highlighted in her book on bias input into AI models, and that's because all the training data is around women's bodies. Yeah. So if you put a man's image into the model, it would simply produce a man's head on a woman's body.
No, really?
Yeah.
This is a really, really big issue with AI in general, isn't it?
Exactly.
Rubbish in, rubbish out.
Exactly.
And you start baking in inequality, whether it's racism, sexism, misogyny, whether you're sending the police officers again and again to the poor parts of town because that's where the arrests always were. And I say, deepfake porn is one very, very egregious part of this. But really important decisions that are affecting people's rights and freedoms in their daily lives are now being made by this technology in a pretty opaque way. Whether you get insured or not, whether you get a job interview or not, whether you get stopped and searched, potentially these really quite serious decisions being made on the basis of opaque, unaccountable technology.
But I would absolutely say this is why it's so important that we get more girls into STEM, because at the moment the people making the models are not representative of society as a whole, and we need to encourage young girls more than ever, into STEM subjects, so they too can be writing these AI models, so that we are not going to have these bias outputs.
Do you want to say a little more about the support you had across because the House of Lords is a slightly odd place.
Yeah.
I suppose you and I have got a bit used to it. I mean, you've been in for about a year now, so you've
a year and a half.
So
yeah.
even then, we quickly acclimatise. But it's slightly odd for a lot of people, isn't it? The way that you can build these kind of very broad cross-party alliances. Do you want to talk about who supported you?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the really special things about the House of Lords, actually, is the cross-party support. So it's very issue-based. If you care about an issue, doesn't matter what party you're from, you've got your people from all the parties. So I had this brilliant team, like a brilliant group of peers who were brilliant. So Tim Clement-Jones from the Lib Dems, who's an absolute AI expert, the wonderful Beeban Kidron, who's a former film director and campaigner on children's safety online, and the wonderful Des Brown, former
Defence Secretary.
Fabulous, former Defence Secretary, who stood his ground and stayed firm with his name on my amendments the whole time. So I'm very, very grateful.
A lot of credibility from
Des.
It's probably quite easy for those of us who are not part of that particular club to have those conversations about, the unelected second chamber, the House of Lords. But it does seem to fill a particular
It has its
role.
moments.
Yeah.
And that was, to me, was a very special moment. And also the brilliant David Panic, who was brilliant.
He's a renowned lawyer,
Absolutely amazing.
and well respected. But look, let me go for the elephant in the room, because the Speakeasy is too small and intimate for the elephant in the room.
You might need a stiff drink.
Yeah. Well, this is the place for it, right? It's a Speakeasy. When I first met you, and you first came into the House of Lords, what a baptism of fire. Some of the worst misogynistic, euphemistic smears that I have seen in public life. And I've received a few myself over the years, to be honest. The most terrible innuendo about why you as a young woman should have been appointed to the House of Lords in the first place, even though, to my recollection, there's a very well-trodden path in both main parties of youngish advisors who have been close to power, working in Number 10, then being given roles in the House of Lords. That was pretty ghastly. Now, I don't want you to dwell on how ghastly that was, but I think a lot of people would have just stayed away. I think that's, when you have that kind of treatment, a lot of people would have stayed away rather than gone running towards the flames with a campaign like this, which is about the kind of misogyny and abuse that, in a way, you'd faced yourself.
Well, like nothing compares to how bad some of the girls, the experience of some of the girls I've worked with. And honestly, it's anything I can do to shine a light on their experience is important to me. And one of the most rewarding things I actually did in the House of Lords was bring in the campaigners and survivors. And the time that a large number of peers gave up to spend with them and sit and talk with them was really special.
Well, I mean, I think that's very big of you, Charlotte. MC, just to point out how gross some of this stuff was. It didn't just come from the usual suspects, right? Yeah. We would, frankly, some of us, expect this from certain tabloids and from wicked social media and the manosphere and so on. And tragically, some of the most vehement misogynists were so-called progressives who really ought to know better.
Indeed.
And yet, something positive still to be achieved, being achieved.
Thank you, Shami.
You must be so proud.
Well, thank you. Honestly, you've been an absolute rock with your brilliant help the whole way through this campaign.
And Shami, you probably weren't, what a horrible experience to have, horrible disinformation being spread about you. But actually, you probably weren't that surprised at seeing it come from unexpected as well as expected places, because it's something that you experienced as well throughout your career as a campaigner. When the campaign doesn't, it's an easy thing to go for. There's a woman,
a youngish woman in particular,
or you're from a particular ethnic background, or whatever the thing is, and then you combine that stuff. That's like a superpower, isn't it?
There's a great line in The West Wing, if you remember The West Wing. You're a bit young for The West Wing, Charlotte, but there's a line about being shocked but not surprised.
Right, yeah.
So you can watch these terrible things happen in public life. You can even experience them yourself, and then you just kind of scotomise them. You forget they happened, you move on, because that's resilience.
Yes.
And then decades later, I had some nasty attacks when I was a young director at Liberty,
Yeah.
Accused of, sleeping with politicians because it was odd that I would persuade them any other way, that kind of thing. Awful at the time, forget all about it. But I think maybe your experience brought some of it back to me, except that this is years later and you think we've moved on. But of course, truth be told, in some respects we haven't moved on. In some respects we've gone backwards, haven't we?
And I really worry about, the future for young girls and young boys, because young boys are being groomed by this ideology. When we see the Tate brothers and the way that their content is driven by algorithms and how they slowly hook people in, it's really frightening.
And it gains legitimacy over time.
Exactly.
It becomes the norm. And it's in many circles now fashionable to say that everything progressive, everything about decency and dignity for all people is woke.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a sort of backlash, a legitimising of really quite Neanderthal attitudes. And your campaign is one of the great bulwarks against it. And power to you, Charlotte. Really.
Thank you, Shami.
Have you found that being at the front of this particular type of campaign, as it is with anything to do with women, that are you worried about drawing some of the attention of those powerful people or institutions that are really driving things like the manosphere and some of that real toxic masculinity?
I think if we spent our time worrying about that, we wouldn't get things done.
Yeah.
And this was honestly the fire in my belly around this when you speak with some of the survivors, wonderful, brilliant survivor, Jodie, who runs Jodie campaigns, Christina, Sophie, and the fire in your belly you get when you speak to these women and what you've met some of the campaigners I work with too, Shami.
Yeah.
They are absolutely wonderful women. And my only panic was we're not moving fast enough. Because every response we got, we were feeling so disheartened because every day that we delayed on legislating on this was another day when women were going to be abused because the numbers kept going up and up and up. And now I'm concerned that it's finding different forms.
Yeah. And our general approach to regulating the internet, social media, advanced intelligence is so old-fashioned, isn't it?
It's Parliament cannot legislate at a pace that keeps up with the evolutions of this technology.
Well, I mean, but if we think about other complex technology, pharmaceuticals, weapons, other things, we've taken an approach where some of this technology needs to be banned, some of it needs to be approved on a case-by-case basis, and some of it needs to be banned for certain purposes but not others. And we just haven't taken that approach with tech, have we? Why do you think that is?
So it's interesting. I think it's definitely to do with the pace at which Parliament legislates, but also I'd say it's due to the borderless nature of the internet.
Yeah.
There's no single place to which it belongs. And if you remember, we very much encountered this issue when it came to what I called and Jodie called solicitation.
Yeah.
So this idea that men are not just creating these sexually explicit images or videos, they're asking other people to create them. So on these forums, it's a group culture where they're uploading clothed images of women and saying, please nudify her, and then much, much worse, really explicit content, and asking other people to degrade the image of this girl. So the problem we had when trying to persuade the government to legislate was the fact that on one forum you could have 10 different people from 10 different jurisdictions. And so we were trying to fight to criminalise the person who asked for this content to be created. But if you remember the circles we went around in on that, finally we have a result. We now have it's going to be criminalised to request an image be made for you, whether or not that image goes on to be created, which is hugely important. Regardless of where the person is in the world who does the creating. If the person in the UK is asking, they are going to be criminalised.
Well, exactly. And the borderless thing is hugely important, isn't it? Because big tech is truly global. The internet may as well be a new continent. I often think of it as a new continent, but and a new continent that's lawless, because the sheriff isn't in town yet, and we haven't properly legislated for this new continent. But even more dangerous than perhaps new continents of the past, this is a continent where all our friends and family and colleagues and neighbours, wherever in the world they live, can zap in and out. And actually, some of them spend a hell of a lot more of their time on the internet than they do in, quote unquote, the real world.
Yeah.
And, it's the new imperium. Some of these companies, the Elon Musks, the Jeff Bezoses, and so, they might as well be emperors. They can buy and sell elected politics. We've seen the influence in US politics in recent times. This will take, surely, in the end, a new treaty, like we did with outer space, like we did with the oceans before. At some point, surely, there's going to have to be global action on this.
Yes, it's interesting which countries do choose to collaborate and which don't.
And ironically, the poor old EU is putting up a better fight than most groupings, isn't it, at the moment?
Exactly. I think the attitude at the moment is sort of a wait and see, but in the meantime, you end up with
so much damage.
Yeah, things slipping through the net, which really should not be slipping through.
What is it that the EU are doing that we are not?
They've taken a more. They've taken. Everybody's taking their early steps in this process, but they are taking a more regulatory approach to AI. Whereas even under the Biden administration in the US, what they put out was really a sort of statement of good wishes and principles, and it was all about working with industry. Whereas the EU legislated to regulate. Now, as I say, it's framework stuff at this stage, but they have at least accepted in principle that this technology needs to be regulated. And as I say, if we do it for pharmaceuticals and weapons and all sorts of other complex technology, why wouldn't we do it? Why wouldn't we do it with this? There are massive business interests pushing in the other direction, but you'd think that ethical business people would not want to be undercut by the bandits.
I think it's also important for the sake of balance that we also say that AI can produce some incredible things. It can save us so many times. When you look at what Google did with AlphaFold and the protein structures, it's simply incredible. And this is why I was also so passionate that women are not deterred from AI because of the way it's being used to degrade them, because we need women in AI. We need them to be scientists, to be innovators, to be building their own LLMs, and
to be more positive. We know the great potential in cancer monitoring, for a start, in scanning. The way that AI can really help alongside human doctors to spot irregularities in people's scans. I personally think if we're ever going to make equal pay legislation work in this country, where we've had equal pay legislation for years but nowhere near equal pay, AI could be a good way of randomly monitoring companies' payrolls to smell a rat, to see that the women are all being paid this amount and the men are all being paid that. You were going to say?
Rather interestingly, I was reading a study which was saying that women are more reluctant to use AI because they consider it cheating in the workplace. And this is putting women at a disadvantage. And so we need to encourage women that actually, where it can help you, use it. because we don't want this discrepancy between men and women.
That's so interesting. So, and men may think they're cheating, but think that that's a good thing,
or they don't. They think it's a tool. It's another tool,
it's
like
a tool to help
Outlook or Excel, or and just a note. LLM is large language model, which is like ChatGPT or DeepMind. Or
I remember when ChatGPT first emerged a couple of years ago now, and I was sitting with a young colleague in a curry house. And he was wildly excited about this. He'd already downloaded it on his phone. And he said, ask me something, Shami, ask me something.
I think I know who this is.
And I'm like, okay, what shall I ask? He said, well, let's get it to write a speech.
Yeah.
Let's get it to write a speech in the style of who? And I said something ridiculous like Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And he said, what will the speech be about? And then he saw somebody's feet in the restaurant and said, how about shoelaces?
Yeah.
And then within 3 seconds, ChatGPT said, these shoelaces are the most fabulous shoelaces in the history of the world. And then let's ask it something else. And so arrogantly I said, get it to write about shoelaces, but in my voice, in Shami's voice. And what we got was, from ChatGPT, shoelaces are the ties that bind us together.
Oh my God.
So good. Interestingly, this brings us on to another problem which is on the rise, and that is people falling in love with chatbots.
Oh gosh.
So my AI partner. So instead of choosing real life relationships, young people are falling in love with chatbots.
And there's been at least one death associated
Well, a
with
guy was encouraged to kill himself by his girlfriend chatbot.
Yeah. And it is just horrific. And it's obviously tech companies are supposed to red team, but in certain scenarios, sometimes people can get around that.
So what next for your campaign, do you think?
Well, it needs to be passed into law, which is very, very close. And then we need to work on the additional parts around it. So the fact that only 90%, the Revenge Porn Helpline does a brilliant job, but only 90% of the content can be removed from online, because in 10% of cases, there's non-compliance. So this is from countries like Russia and countries in Latin America where the content can't be removed. So we need better recourse for women to be able to remove that content.
Right.
Is putting it in the kind of context of thinking of it like revenge porn, which again is like a relatively newish way of thinking about people releasing content that was really just for them. Has that helped kind of make people think about it, help people think about it in the correct way?
So now we call it image-based sexual abuse because of the connotations around porn and it sounding like something that a woman has consented to.
Yeah. Is talking about it like as if it is like another arm of revenge porn, has that helped people consider this as not a thought crime like you mentioned earlier on? It's not sexual fantasy, it's a real thing that causes harm. Or is there a better way to communicate the harm that it causes?
I don't know. Sorry, I'm not really sure how to answer that.
But no, I think what you were saying about what did you say we call it online
image-based sexual abuse,
which is
it's better than calling it porn.
Completely different to revenge porn, because actually you're right. Like the connotations around the idea of porn.
Yeah, because for a lot of people, porn is or a great part of porn is something that's a consent-based industry. It's worth billions of dollars in terms of the world economy, and it's perfectly legitimate. You know, unless it's child pornography, unless it's violent pornography and non-consent based. So even calling it pornography is problematic, and puts it in a certain cultural space that lends it a legitimacy that this really doesn't have at all, does it?
Yes, that's right. The way that I always describe it to people is, imagine a woman walking into a pub and suddenly you can take her image and put it into own sexually explicit content of her. And I think that in itself is so alarming.
And you can, of course.
And you can.
Well, I mean, anyone who has a mobile phone now is a walking CCTV camera. The internet is full of images of everybody, not just celebrities, but anybody who's ever put their image on a dating site, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah.
Do you remember the Sarah Everard vigil?
I do.
And it was crushed pretty brutally by the Met Police, and there was a particularly powerful image of a young woman with red hair being manhandled.
Patsy Stevenson.
Is that her name?
Yeah.
Patsy Stevenson being manhandled by the Met. And then apparently in subsequent days and weeks, she was stalked on social media by a number of men, including serving police officers.
It's just horrific.
Who put pictures of themselves up in uniform.
It's just awful. And she's an absolutely fantastic campaigner. I was lucky enough to meet her. She came along to one of the sittings on non-consensual intimate images.
There you go. I mean, I think it's sobering, isn't it? That you don't have to be a celebrity or a famous person or someone who's been particularly promiscuous with your image online. There are images of all of us online everywhere. There's the rise of CCTV. There's the fact that everyone with a smartphone is a walking CCTV camera. All the images that we put of ourselves on the internet for social media and dating app purposes and so on. There's a lot of our personal data and images out there to be used and abused.
And it's important to remember that when deepfakes originally started, it was mainly of celebrities, but now it's the reverse. It's mainly non-celebrity women.
I think that is important. When people realise that, it changes their approach somewhat.
The celebrities is the Trojan horse, right? Because you have that discussion about that sort of really sort of fake discussion around. Oh yeah, but they're
asking
live their
for
lives
it.
in public,
It's
like
horrific.
this.
Yeah.
So they get that past everybody.
Well, another version of that is the politician, quote unquote, and the argument about satire.
Yes.
So as I recall, Charlotte, one of the many sort of straw men that was put up against you was that some of this needs to be lawful, so that there can be naughty satire of politicians. You know, what if there's an image of a politician, a deepfake image of a politician on the loo, but it's making a political point. Well, what do you say to that?
That is still being put up against me, that argument. We are still not through that argument.
Well, it's either intimate or it isn't.
Cartoon, and it's ridiculous because it's this definition of an intimate state which includes toileting. So they're basically saying if you do a toileting cartoon, then without reasonable excuse, we may inadvertently breach Article 10 of the ECHR on freedom of expression.
Nonsense.
Which is crazy.
I think it really boils down to how you see these things and what is analogous and what is not. Fantasy is fantasy. Fantasy is in my head. It may be real in my head, but it's not real to anybody but me. And there is a limit. There's serious things that go wrong in people's heads, but there is a limit to what can be done with an image that exists and only ever existed in my head. That is fantasy. Then there is a conventional cartoon.
Yes.
And I know that cartoons can be drawn by AI too, but a cartoon looks like a cartoon. It does not look like an image of a real human being. Even if it was based in an AI world on a real photograph of a human being, a cartoon looks like a cartoon, and the viewer will see this is a cartoon. The point about deep fake images is that they look real. They look and feel real.
Exactly. And this Article 10 issue is one that we have kept coming up against, as you know, when we were trying to get it to be consent-based, instead of having to prove a perpetrator's intention to cause harm, distress, humiliation, or gain sexual gratification. is because we were told that it would otherwise breach the UCHR.
Article 10 being
Yeah.
freedom of expression,
Yes.
and how this is how this can possibly be framed more as a matter of expression than of
A woman's right
a woman's
to choose.
dignity
Yeah.
and privacy on the one hand, as opposed to the deepfake pornographer's freedom of expression. Your
Yeah.
body, your image becomes their expression. I think not.
It's we've been through many battles on the way to
And the
getting this
and the problem
into law.
is that this is not good. This is not good copy for the Convention on Human Rights.
No, exactly.
At a tough time for making the argument about
Yes.
human rights, for it to be cover
Yeah.
for this kind of spurious argument is really troubling.
It's and I think one thing that we know for sure is that big tech will not act without clear law.
Yeah.
And that's why when people say, oh, well, big tech will do something. No, it won't. It's
a profit
clear
model.
Law.
Yeah, it's a profit model.
Yes, follow the money.
If there's law banning it from doing certain things and there are consequences of breaching it, fair enough, they will factor that into the business model. But why should they otherwise? Why should they
Exactly.
otherwise? In fact, I sometimes think of even a corporation, even a global corporation, as a bit of an algorithm, i.e. something that was designed by humans that has now outgrown humans. A form of social technology, legal technology that has gone beyond our control, which is why the chapter in my book that you kindly mentioned earlier is called Modern Prometheus, which was, of course, Mary Shelley's subtitle for Frankenstein. We've built something. We thought we were very clever. We were very clever, but we built something beyond our control. Maybe it's time to try and control or regulate it a little better.
I think that's the journey we have begun on,
Well, you certainly have, Charlotte.
started on. Even.
Pardon my ignorance. You two will both know more detail about this, but I'd been reading that there's been a real rise in what they're calling nudifying apps. So where do they fit in this? Will downloading one of those, having one of those apps on your phone, be enough for that to be criminal, or is it a grey area?
So there are different ways in which to create these images. So you might use one of the online platforms like we were talking about earlier, or nudifying apps. And there are shockingly, some of these are hosted on the App Store. So when this law comes into effect, it will be illegal to create sexually explicit content of a person without their consent. So it will not be illegal to possess the app itself. And this is where, as Shami knows, with law, you always have to be quite careful because you need to create law which is lasting and not dependent on a certain type of technology. So it's still, the question is still out there on whether we should ban nudification apps.
And I suppose the counter argument is, well, they're fine if you're only using images of someone who's consented. Mm-hmm. But then there is a real question there for the business model of the people who own and monetize those apps as to what safeguards they should be required to build into the app to ensure that it's a dual key. It's not just the person buying the app and doing the nudification, but the person who must consent.
And of course, you can remove consent, right? And you should be able to remove consent at any time.
Consent is a live thing. And not only that, but the training data is all the training data of the women's naked bodies to begin with. Is that all consented to?
Well, where did that come from in the first place?
Exactly. Because when you think how much training data is required, it's huge quantities. How would you?
And where did all of that come
verify
from?
all that?
Yeah, and what's out there on the internet now, a lot of that is non-consensual images that are out there to be harvested and mined and monetized. Well, look, that's very chilling. It's all very chilling, but at the same time, you give us inspiration, I think, Charlotte. How far you've come, not just yourself, as a parliamentarian and a campaigner, but how far you've brought this campaign in, 18 months?
Thank you, Shami. And thank you so much for all your support and being with me the whole way.
Anytime. Thank you so much for coming to the Speakeasy.
Thank you so much for having me.